jelly rolls. Aren't they fun? I just love this cut of fabric. This is one of my favorite pre-cuts, and today I'm going to talk all about jelly rolls, well, and roly-polies and all of that, which I'll get to in a minute. First off, my name is Chris O'Neill from Sew the Distance. Thank you for joining me today as we talk everything jelly rolls. Let's talk about that name jelly roll first, okay? All right, so jelly roll is a cut of fabric. It is coined by Moda, so it is a name brand of fabric. It is a trademarked name. So other companies such as Riley Blake call them roly-polies. Robert Kaufman calls them roll-ups, and there's a whole bunch of different names for these, but they're basically the same thing. So think Bandage and Band-Aid, Band-Aid being the name brand, Bandage being the actual product. It's the same with these types of strip unit thingy pre-cuts that we know and love, or most of us love them, but we'll get to that too. If you do search for jelly rolls, they do all come up on shops like Missouri Star or Fat Quarter Shop or whatever. If you search for jelly rolls, you'll see all of these. So we're gonna call them jelly rolls for today. All right, so what are they? They are bundles of pre-cuts that are 2.5 inches wide by the width of fabric. So let's talk about what width of fabric means. Width of fabric is the width. So it's selvage to selvage, and I know I say that wrong, but it's the edge to edge of fabric. Jelly roll strips are cut the width of fabric. That's why sometimes they're 40 inches long, sometimes they're 42, sometimes they're 44. It really depends on how they're printed, what's printed on them, what the repeat is, all of that jazz. It's something to keep in mind. They're not going to be uniform in the length, but they are in the width, okay? Or mostly. The pinked edges, I'll get to that, I promise. Now the jelly roll width of fabric that you get is very, very stretchy because it is the width of fabric. That's something to keep in mind when working with jelly rolls, because that width of fabric, that very stretchiness, can help you or not as you work with these. By the way, the other way is the length of fabric, which is this, and it's not stretchy at all. And then we also have the bias, which is this, and extremely, extremely stretchy. All right, now that we know what it is, let's talk about what they contain. These usually contain between 40 and 42 of these strips. Typically, they are the complete line of fabric, but not always. So let me see. I have quite a few here. Okay, this one I just got, I love. This is by Sweetfire Rose. It's Once Upon a Christmas. It's a Moda. It contains at least one print from the entire line, so we'll see everything here. Now, if a line of fabric has, say, 36 prints in it, you're gonna see duplicates. In the description, which we'll talk about in a minute, it does tell you if there's gonna be repeats or not. So this is one example. Another example is you can buy them that are just blenders. Do you see how this is just a whole bunch of neutrals? And this is called Moda's Favorite Vintage Linens. It's not a complete line of fabric. It's just curated to be really helpful for us if you want a pack of blenders. So there's a lot of different curations of the fabrics, especially now. I think it all started with the fabric line, and then it's just grown because they've grown in popularity, and they're just wonderful things to have. But they don't always come in rolls. So for example, Benetech does them flat like this. There's a few others that do that too. So when you're purchasing a jelly roll or roly-poly or whatever, one of these packs of pre-cuts, there's a few things that you can keep in mind when you're looking at the fabrics, like the colorways, what's included and what's not. The biggest tip I can give you is to read the description. That'll give you a ton of information on how many repeats. Some of them will say like 2 of each fabric. Some will say there are some repeats. Some there's up to 5 repeats on it. Just pay attention to what you're buying. Another tip for this is that they do show usually a whole card or picture of all the fabrics included. You can count them to see how many fabrics are included, and that will give you maybe an idea of how many repeats there are. You can also use this little card to make it into a black and white picture. And you can do that as simply as taking a picture on your phone of the screen, and you can change it into a black and white setting. That'll show you the value and what spectrum you're going to be getting. Now you may be wondering, but Chris, I'm in person buying these, and that is wonderful because we need to support those local shops, right? There are a few things that you can do at this point. You can ask the owner, because a lot of times they will have the swatches and know exactly what is contained in the jelly roll. You can also search the fabric line on your phone or have the shop owner search it on their computer and see exactly what's included. Why is this important? Well, this is important because when you're picking a pattern for a jelly roll, you do have to pay attention to that. Some jelly roll patterns will show something in the same hue, like the orange Rolie Polie, and then you add a background. You could easily add, say, this background. Some will show that you use the entire jelly roll unit and you'll make all of these colors work in your favor because you have a wide spectrum of values and sometimes even hues of different colors. And it'll help you when you're deciding what exactly you're gonna make so you have success with making it. So which comes first, picking a pattern or picking a jelly roll? That's completely up to you and how you work. I personally love to buy jelly rolls because I think they're pretty, and then I'll go and search for a pattern to make them, or I'll just play with them too. I like to do that too. It's also important to note that you can also make your own sets, and I have a video on that if you want to check it out, on making your own sets and bringing them together, curating it from your scraps, which is a great way to use up your scraps and to find one of these wonderful patterns that you can use for a jelly roll set. Speaking of patterns, they're everywhere. You can go to all of the major fabric lines, usually have a free pattern section, and I'll put a link in the description and on my blog to different places where you can go to find free jelly roll patterns. You can also buy jelly roll patterns. You can search for them on Etsy, and I also have one in my shop that uses one jelly roll packet, and it doesn't matter which one. You will be able to be successful with any of these that you pick. Well, maybe not the neutrals. It might not give you, although it would be pretty. It'd be like a linen thing. I don't know, you could do that too. Another thing to think about when you are looking at patterns is also read the description, because sometimes they call for a background fabric too. So keep that in mind as well. Now that we picked a pattern, we picked a jelly roll, what next? So I'm gonna show you some tips on what happens when you open one up and how I treat it when I'm getting ready to make a project out of it. So the first thing I do is I'll open it up, the plastic of course, and then I'll take a lint roller, and I like the ones that are made for pets because they seem to be stickier, and I'll just go over it to get off a lot of those fuzzies. You can see how much is coming off. Now it doesn't take care of all of it, but it does take care of a lot of it. And we'll flip it over, and as you can see, I already need to change this. Oh, look at that. The next thing I do is I like to keep this ribbon because, I don't know, it's pretty and you could use it in projects. So I'll take it off. And if you want to keep it rolled up like this, you can always put a rubber band around it. First thing I like to do is unroll them. You can also see how they're staggered, so they have that nice roll to them. Now let's just look at one of the strips, and you can see that these are grouped together. The same prints are together in this one. Not always the case, but a lot of times it is. So you can see how this is very, very stretchy, like I talked about before. Because of that, depending on the pattern, you can starch these. Just be mindful that if you starch them, it is going to bring all the fibers together and shrink it some. So be careful with the pattern that you're using. Also pre-washing. Some people will pre-wash these in lingerie bags. Be careful because they might not all shrink evenly. Hopefully they will, but sometimes they don't. Now let's talk about that pinked edge. The pinked edge is on there so it doesn't fray. So always the big question is, what is the 2.5 inches. My best advice for you is to measure them. Make sure you know what you're working with and adjust accordingly. So let's see what this one is. All right, so I have two different rulers here. This is a 2.5 inch ruler, wide ruler. All right, so for this particular one, you can see that the 2.5 inches is measured to the tip of the pinked edge, so the point. It's not always like that. Sometimes the measurement is to the valley. This one, however, is to the point, which is really nice. I prefer this. Now, if you don't have a 2.5 inch wide ruler, you can just take a regular ruler and line it up and check. Now remember, each of these lines has a thickness, so I like to go over to one of the half marks because I can see it a little bit better. Let's do it right here. And you can see, of course, that it is to the points or the tips of this. It's 2.5 inches from point to point. Always measure to see. That's a really great tip because you just never know, and especially if you want accuracy in your strips, it's just a good practice to have. Now, because they are the width of fabric, there is usually a hard crease right here in the middle. Depending on the pattern that I'm using, I may cut this right in half because I want to have a scrappier look. If you do use the entire piece, however, you might want to press this out really well. You can also see, and this is a great example, isn't it funny how that happened? This is a little distorted, again, because of the fabric, that point is a bit off. You might want to trim that up before working with it if you're going to be using this section. All right, so now that we see all of that wonderful goodness, what I like to do is trim off my salvages while it's still like this, because they kind of get in the way if you don't. And I'll do that with all of these, and I'll prep my fabric. For the project I'm going to be working on, I want to separate lights and darks, and I will just go through and do that. See what I have, kind of take an inventory, look at all the beautiful fabrics, and peek at them. I'm not a huge fan of this pink. I'm not sure if I'm going to use it in my project. That is okay. You don't have to use every single piece of the jelly roll in your project. You can swap it out for other fabrics if you want to, or you can just not use it. So if you definitely need all of the pieces from the jelly roll, you'd have to swap them out. And I might, for this one, I would swap out for a green or a white, depending on what I needed. For now, I'm going to take this entire stack of pink. I'm going to set these aside. So this is the ones I think I'm going to be working with. I might go back to these, but I'm not sure. Two more things about these strips. When you're sewing them together, it's good to alternate. So say I'm doing a strip of 3 rows, say I'm making a rail fence. So if I'm sewing these 3 units together, I would alternate. So I would sew this one to this, sew all the way down. And then when it was time to add my next piece, I would start at this end and sew this way. So I'm sewing the first one this way and the second one this way on this side. When you're doing that, it will help eliminate a bow that you might be getting in a strip set of fabric. Just a tip on that. The other thing is that stretchy part of the fabric, the cross grain. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that cross grain can work for you or against you. It can work against you because if you're pulling or tugging as you're putting this through the machine, it can become distorted and not lay flat and give you some puckers and a lot of problems. However, to make it work in your favor is that you can ease in because there is some stretch to it. So if you have a block, say, that isn't quite lining up, you can tug a little bit and get that to ease in. So what do you do with the leftover strips, the ones that you're not going to use? That's always a dilemma, and it's always something we don't really think about, because then we end up with these strips and they're kind of just sitting around, and then they get ratty on the edges because of the fraying of the edges. Can be a mess. So I saw Michelle from The Simple Quilter talk about these containers, and I got 2 of them, and they're specifically for jelly rolls. I don't know how many it holds, but I think a lot. They're really neat. They're by Artbin, which if you've seen some of my other videos, you know how much I love their products. And they even come, this is from the other one, they even come with these holders to hold it down. Now, currently I have them all stored in a bin, and these are scrap strips that I've cut, and they're also from leftover jelly roll packs. I'm curious at how many I can get in these 2 bins and if I need to buy another bin. So let's see. Let's just see how many we can get into this. Okay, so that's 120. Now some are full pieces, but that's a lot. It's a lot. And I know I'm not color coding them necessarily. I will, I promise, go back and do that. But I wanted to see, let's see if it closes. So that definitely is full, but I bet I can get a couple more in. So like, I don't know, well over 100. I bet you could get 3 rolls maybe, 3 jelly roll sets, at least the ones that are 42 pieces. Yeah, you can get a lot in here. Oh my gosh, I love them. So, I mean, how cool is that? Look at that. So this will be so much better for storing these. I hope you enjoyed all of these tips on using jelly rolls and how to make the most of them in your sewing space. I'd love to see any of the jelly roll projects that you make. Please let me know. Send them to me through email. I'll put my email below. I'll put it here on the screen. I'd love to see some of the projects you make because they're so much fun and we can just share everything we've learned about jelly rolls with each other. Also, stay tuned for a video on a jelly roll project that I think you'll like. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you take some time to sew, and I'll see you real soon. Bye.